Hello, I'm James, and welcome to a Jonesing for Film franchise review. This week I will be taking a look at the Final Destination series, quite possibly my favorite horror series. So we'll start with 2000's Final Destination. The story follows a high school student named Alex Browning who is going on a trip to Paris with his French class. After boarding the plane, Alex has a very realistic vision of the plane blowing up upon takeoff. He flips out, gets into a fight with one of his classmates, thus getting himself and a few others removed from the plane. After the plane takes off, Alex's vision comes true and the plane explodes. Fast forward a few months later, one of Alex's classmates who got off the plane dies in a bizarre accident. Alex does some investigating and discovers that getting off the plane screwed up Death's design, and it is now coming back to finish what it started. Now, I love this movie for many reasons. The first is the premise. Most horror movies focus on a bunch of dumb teens with no depth who get killed by a mask-wearing maniac who kills for the sake of killing. Here we get a reason for why they are getting killed. They were supposed to die, screwed up the plan, and now death itself is going to set the book straight. And the fact that it's death itself adds to the creepiness of the film. It's not something they can physically stop. It's an invisible force that can get them anywhere. Also good are the characters. There's only a handful of main characters, which means that they get developed enough to care what happens to them. Now, the movie isn't without fault. It is a horror movie, so the acting itself isn't spectacular, but it is good enough to not destroy the whole film. But honestly, aside from that, there really isn't much that I have to complain about. It has some great tension, some fairly developed characters, and a great premise. I give Final Destination a superb. Now we move on to 2003's Final Destination 2. The film takes place 1 year after the events of the first film and is the same premise, just substitute plane crash with highway pileup. Now personally, this is my favorite in the franchise for many reasons. First is how they connect to the first film. I'm not going to spoil what it is, but it is actually very clever by horror movie standards. Also, the deaths are very intricate and gory without being comical. Plus, the highway pileup at the start of the film is very intense. Now this one has a few more problems than the first. Once again, the acting is so-so, and in this one the characters aren't as fleshed out as the characters in the first film because there's more characters to focus on. They do have some depth, but not as much as the original characters from the first film. But overall, it is a great sequel that capitalized on what was good about its predecessor. I give it a superb. Now let's talk about 2006's Final Destination 3, which again is the same premise as before, only this time with a roller coaster. Now this is the downfall of the franchise. This one hardly connects to the previous films. They mention the first movie once, and there's a picture of the highway pilot from the second movie. That's all the connection we get in this one. Characters, for the most part, are cutouts minus the two leads, and even they aren't as fleshed out as they could have been. The level of tension doesn't meet the levels that the first two films had, and the deaths themselves, for the most part, are good, but are overly gory, so the intensity of the situation dwindles. And the saddest part is that this is directed by the same director who did the first film. You would think he would keep the same vibe in this one that he had from the first film. So Final Destination 3 isn't terrible, but as a fan of the first two films, this one disappointed me. I give it an average. Now we enter 2009's The Final Destination. Once again, same premise, this time with a racetrack. This is the worst film in the franchise, and actually probably my least favorite film ever made. I've seen some bad films. This one I absolutely hate. Where do I begin? For one, they tried to up the scale by putting more characters because, hey, more characters means more death. There's too many characters here, though. None of them get developed. Half of them don't even have names. The actors are credited as mechanic, mechanic's girlfriend, racist's wife. How am I supposed to care about a character when I don't even know their name? Actually, come to think of it, I can't remember the names of the main characters either. They're just throwaways, basically. This one was a cash grab. The acting itself is awful. Deaths are at their worst. Overly gory to the point of comedic rather than suspenseful. Mainly due to the fact that it was shot in 3D. This is one of those movies that does not transfer well into 2D. It looks like a freaking cartoon. There is no mention of any of the previous films, which is baffling because this is the same director of the second one, which had the best connection in the whole franchise. There is not a single thing I enjoy about this movie. I give it a poor. So after that disgrace to my favorite horror movie franchise, one more film was released not that long ago actually. Yes, in 2011, Final Destination 5 was released, and I reviewed it on my other channel, but now I'm going to review it again for this video. So once again, the premise is the same, this time involving a suspension bridge collapsing. So after being pretty much insulted by the last film, I had no expectations for this film at all. It was once again in 3D, but I chose to go see it in theaters because I am a fan of the films. And I was hoping maybe it would shock me, but I wasn't expecting. I wasn't holding my breath. And I'm so glad that I did go and see this because this brought back what I loved about the first two films. The tension is back and it kept me at the edge of my seat. This movie has the most tense scene in the entire franchise. The amount of characters has been lowered again, so we get some actual development on some of them. And they throw this very interesting concept into a premise that has gotten stale. And even though it was in 3D, it still transfers well into 2D. You can actually watch this in 2D and say, yeah, okay, that was in 3D, but it's not over the top, so it's like, okay, maybe they didn't need to do it in 3D. The acting could still use a little work though, so I only give Final Destination 5 an excellent. It's not as great as the first two, but it came closer than 3 and 4. So that is my take on the Final Destination franchise. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe. Also, don't forget to visit me on Facebook and visit my new blog. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in my next review.